President Barack Obama and Congress are still at odds over how to avoid the upcoming fiscal cliff. A double whammy of tax increases and spending cuts will take effect January 1st unless a deal is reached. The president wants to raise taxes on the top 2%. Republicans want to extend tax cuts for all. Earlier this week, Obama met with a group of governors, including Wisconsin's Scott Walker, to talk about the fiscal cliff and its potential impact. Fox 11's Robert Hornacek joins us this morning with the governor to talk about the fiscal cliff and more. Good morning.
Good morning, Rachel. Thanks for having us in to talk about this. Thanks for coming in, Governor.
Thanks, Robert.
Tell us about those discussions that Rachel was mentioning earlier this week in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, we had 6 governors, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, really there on behalf of all the governors in the country, not just for our own individual agendas. And what we tried to talk to the president and the vice president about, and we later had follow-up meetings with the speaker and the Senate Majority Leader, was about making sure that in any of these plans, not picking one or the other, but in any of these plans, raising concerns about the impact on the states and ultimately on the people we represent. So saying if they are going to make reductions, do it in a way where there can be savings not only for the federal government, but for the state government as well. Do it in a way that's flexible so we can deal with the changes that will ultimately come out of these plans. And most importantly, one of the things I specifically brought up is be careful about the impact on the economy. We've seen slow growth. It's not as fast as we've seen in previous recoveries. The last thing we want to do is slow that down. And the president and the legislative leaders were receptive. We'll see what happens.
It seems like both sides are kind of at an impasse, not being able to get a deal done yet. Do you see a deal getting done in time to avoid this cliff?
Well, you know, on one hand, it's a city filled with people who don't want that to happen on either side of the aisle. I mean, it's a city filled with lobbyists and others who thrive off of chaos. It's much different than what we experience here in Wisconsin and other states. So on one side, you could be a little cynical. On the other hand, though, I do think that a lot of times deals get made that are reasonable to the general public, but maybe have a little bit of pain on either side right at the last moment. So the fact that we're still a ways off, I don't think is necessarily a sign that by the end of the year they won't get a deal. It's just too early to tell.
If the sticking point for the Republicans at the national level seems to be that top 2%, and they're saying extend tax cuts for everybody, why not just extend them for the 98% now and say that's better than nothing? Why dig in and say, no, we need to do it this way?
Well, I think, and again, I'm not there, what I talked about was specific to the states, but I think the concern isn't so much just about who's in and who's out, but is about the overall impact to the economy, knowing that oftentimes when you talk about tax breaks and things like that, you're not just talking about wealthy individuals. Overwhelmingly, you're talking about small businesses, because a lot of small businesses pay individual income taxes and not corporate taxes. And so there's a real concern if you take money out of that, you might have an impact on the economy that otherwise would be put into investing in new capital, putting people to work. By the same token, you know, having payroll taxes go up or eliminating the payroll holiday is also a grave concern. So there's got to be some way that they can make some sort of reasonable adjustment, do so in a way that protects taxpayers, particularly middle-class taxpayers, without having a devastating impact on the economy. And I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm an optimist to begin with. I still think in the end they're going to get something done.
Let's bring the conversation back here in Wisconsin. You've been traveling the state talking about the next state budget. What are your priorities? What have you seen and what have you heard from people as you've gone around the state as the priorities you think need to be addressed in this budget?
Yeah, and in fact, it's been a nice tour. I was just at Ace Marine last week. I'm going to be down in Appleton today talking about this as well. You know, it's interesting contrast to what we were just talking about Washington. I mean, remember 2 years ago, we inherited a $3.6 billion budget deficit. Now we have a surplus. In fact, first time ever in 2 consecutive years, we put money aside in the rainy day fund. So we begin in a much better position than we were 2 years ago, much better position there in Washington. I've laid out 5 priorities. First and foremost, create jobs. Secondly, prepare the workforce, because I've heard repeatedly from those in medicine, healthcare, IT, and particularly in advanced manufacturing, that they have jobs, they just don't have enough people to fill those jobs. Third, continue to transform education. I've got 2 kids who've gone through the public schools myself. I want a great education system in the state. Fourth, transform the government. And fifth, make investments in our infrastructure, particularly in transportation, but also in high-speed internet and cost-effective, reliable sources of power, even in things like healthcare.
Republicans, again, control the governor's mansion, also control the legislature. What can you tell us about the approach that Republicans will take in this budget cycle, given the fact that 2 years ago it became such a contentious, difficult time in Madison and really in the whole state?
Yeah, and I thankfully that's passed, not only with the recall elections done, you know, about a half a year ago now, and you've seen things ease down, but I also think just in terms of the process, you know, 2 years ago, we had this massive deficit we had to deal with. We had to make some dramatic changes, but they paid off. I mean, they were tough but prudent choices, and we have a budget surplus to begin with. So it doesn't mean we can go hog wild. We certainly have to be cautious about things in the future and try and fund those priorities. But I think both in the budget cycle and even early in this legislative session, January and February and early into the spring, if we stay focused first and foremost on creating jobs and the other priorities I mentioned, which really are part of that, those are issues that when we started 2 years ago, people forget. In January and early in February of 2011, almost all the measures I pushed in our jobs special session were passed with Republican and Democrat votes because people want to do things that help create more jobs. We stay focused on that. We don't get off on side issues. I think we'll be able to continue down that same kind of path.
For the last couple of years, there's been this thing hanging out there in Milwaukee County about this investigation involving some of your former aides when you were county executive. As you've watched things progress and now to the level where I think a deputy chief of staff was recently sentenced to some jail time for illegal campaigning on county time, what are your thoughts and what have you seen from your perspective as this has moved forward? Well,
if you look at the recent instance, it was an individual that was involved with taking money from this program called Operation Freedom, which was something I started about a decade ago, a one-day event to honor military personnel, veterans, and their families, and thank them for their service. We did it all through volunteer donations, and ultimately one of the veteran service organizations that was involved, the leader of that, was charged and found guilty of taking money from that. One of the other people he worked with, who'd worked at the county, did that as well. That was something we initiated. We were concerned about that. My chief of staff, Tom Nardelli at the time, and I sat down. Were very concerned about where that money was, never knowing just how bad it was. And I ultimately sent him to go talk to the district attorney, and that initiated this whole discussion. Now, the other position you just talked about is one where somebody was campaigning not for me, but for somebody else while they were working for the county. That completely violates the policy we had. We had someone else in our office who violated that a year or two before then, and we took action. Had we known about this other individual, we would have clearly taken action. I mean, time and time again, the evidence has showed that. So I hope we're near a conclusion. I don't know. I don't have any inside information on that. I think for everybody involved and for folks watching, they'd like to have that chapter completed for us to be able to move on, because every time we talk about that, it's one less minute I'm talking about jobs and improving the economy and the prosperity of people in this state.
As a manager, as an executive, whether it's chief executive of the county or of the state, some people would wonder, how could you not know what your people beneath you are doing?
Well, I mean, I had 7,000 people that work for me at the county. I have 70,000 at the state. I want to know what everybody's doing. And you look going forward, we started, when I started almost 2 years ago as governor, we took some even more stringent steps as governor. I have an ethics policy. I have a training program. I have a statement that people have to sign. We have continuous updates in that regard. We do that for our appointees and our cabinet as well as our governor's office folks. So we have taken advanced steps even since then to make sure that things are transparent, objective, and we're following the letter of the law as well as the intent of the law. And I think going forward, people are going to see that.
Okay. Running out of time, we do want to ask you another question. Christmas. What's on the governor's Christmas list?
For me, the best thing I could have, you know, as much as the economy's improved and employment's gone down, I'd love to have, you know, my best wish ever would be anyone who wanted a job had the opportunity to get a job in the coming year. I think that would be great for the whole state.
No way to put that in your stocking, though, probably.
No, that would be an awfully big stocking, but I'd even take a fraction of that, because in the end, it just makes life better. People get back to work, the state does better. We're heading that direction, but we got a ways to go yet. We're going to work hard in the coming year on it.
All right, thank you very much, Governor Walker. Thanks for coming in. Good day, Wisconsin. We'll be right back.